you.
More dietary fat, less cholesterol. My name is David Feldman, and this is a little bit of my background. I'm a business developer and an entrepreneur, but first and foremost, I consider myself an engineer. I started the ketogenic diet in April of 2015, and I had 7 blissful months. It was fantastic until I got my cholesterol test. I found out I was what we call inside the ketogenic community a hyper responder. So sure enough, I get a 329 and I lose it. I get very concerned, as a lot of people should, if they've been being told their entire life that this is what most doctors will tell you is bad, right? I began studying every single thing I could about cholesterol, homeostasis, and the lipid system. And I was amazed at many of the things that I was finding, because that was 2 weeks of darkness between that test and what I wanted to do was a second test to confirm the results, kind of my second opinion. This is kind of what I kept finding. Unfortunately, the general opinion out there was that even though the lipid hypothesis was still a hypothesis, the pathogenesis to atherosclerosis was not yet fully observed, controlling for all other factors. There still seemed to be this kind of attitude like, yeah, well, we still know, though, that it is, in fact, in play. So the more that I kept learning about the lipid system, the more, as a software developer, I saw a pattern I recognized. And I did wonder if it was me projecting, but it looked like a network. In many respects, if you ever get really bored, I'll geek out with you and tell you all of the different ways that it is, but we're not going to fit that in here because I'm going to get your eyes rolling. So what I'm about to show you is a very basic graph. This very first number, the 329, the red one in the bottom left, that reflects what my total cholesterol is. That's reflected on the axes on the right. And up there at the top, the 224, that's the total grams of dietary fat I was having right at the end of that 7 months when I get this cholesterol score. But then I get depressed. For about 2 weeks, I'm miserable. Even though, while I'm having those miserable 2 weeks, I'm learning about the lipid system and I'm also fascinated. It's very conflicting. Then I go ahead and get the next score, and to my shock, I get a 424. This is after my dietary fat from being so depressed goes all the way down to 83 grams a day. And I actually made a sound when the lady gave me the news, which she thought was horrible and thought I was going to have a horrible reaction. I said, ha 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 ha. And she didn't know how to interpret it. But the truth is, right in that moment, for me, this is an appropriate graph because it was a big cross out of a whole lot of the stuff I just learned, which is, without question, my dietary fat going way down should have at least brought my cholesterol down from everything that I'd been reading in conventional literature. That's not all what happened, right? So now I enter a phase of what's called extreme N of 1. How many of you guys read my blog, know anything about me? Show of hands. Okay. Would you guys think I'm a pretty decent extreme N of 1? Good. Yeah? Okay, so for those that don't worry. I'm going to take you through the paces. You see, I track just about everything. I track my glucose, I track my ketones, and I track just about everything I ingest. Oh, just about everything, I mean everything that I ingest. If I do supplements, I get a picture of that. If I get a diet soda, I get a picture of that. If I get water, I'm taking a picture of that. And you'll notice, for things that I can't actually measure in a scale, I'll actually have my left hand prominently showing, because that way I can have a reference for volume. It makes for much more accurate estimates. In fact, just now, I actually had one that I had from that pig roast from yesterday. I just taken a picture, got a great quantity, right? And then some jerk comes along and messes up my sample. He actually takes some of the meat off. So I made him point to what it was that he took so that I'd be sure I'd have an accurate record. I'm gonna watch out for these guys. Meanwhile, I also take a lot of blood tests. What's that you say? How many blood tests? 72 blood tests to date, and by the way, that doesn't count the 3 times I got poked on Friday and didn't actually succeed at pulling the blood. I was very disappointed. Okay, so now I want to introduce you to what all of this data has brought to me. It's what I call the inversion pattern. Now, before I do, I want to introduce you to something that everybody who's on a ketogenic diet and cares at all about cholesterol needs to understand. This is the anatomy of what we call a low-density lipoprotein, and I'm sure you recognize those initials, right? LDL. That stands for low-density lipoprotein. And while there are many other things that are inside this container, the container is the low-density lipoprotein. I'm going to call it an LDL particle past this point. And the cholesterol that's inside, that's the LDL-C. Usually when they say your LDL is too high, what they mean is the cholesterol inside of the LDL particle, inside the low-density lipoprotein, is what's too high. That's what they mean. Oftentimes, though, even doctors, God bless them, they confuse the cholesterol with the actual low-density lipoproteins. But there's something else that's in this picture that's far more prominent. What is it? Go ahead and say it out loud. Triglycerides. Triglycerides are what feed your cells energy. You're constantly hearing them in a negative light, and that's understandable on a blood test where it's too high. But when you go on a ketogenic diet, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, your triglycerides go lower. It's because your cells are eating more of them and using them for fuel. I want you to remember these colors too, because whenever you see purple, it's going to denote the low-density lipoprotein particle. Secondly, when you see blue, it's going to be cholesterol, because I'm going to take you through a lot of graphs real quick. Don't blink. Okay, I get these 8 data points after doing all of these tests, and I notice in capturing my dietary fat on a 3-day average, the resulting LDL-C for the blood test following it had a striking inverse relationship with my dietary fat. I get this, I excitedly go to low-carb Vail, and I start talking a million miles an hour to a lot of different doctors there, and they don't know how to take it. You can ask them some of the funny stories about that a little bit later. But I eventually talked to that jerk I showed you a little bit earlier, Ivor Cummins, which turns out he knew a lot about cholesterol. And I tell him I'm going to go ahead and do an experiment to see if I can reproduce this, because that's what good science does, is it tries to reproduce its results. I'll come back to that again soon. Sure enough, I eat to a diet plan. This dashed orange line is a 3-day average of dietary fat I intentionally created to see if I could induce the same curve on the other side of the fence with LDL cholesterol. And I did. Then, of course, as an engineer, I would want to now step on the gas. Let me see if I can create a confounder by actually bringing up the total amount of dietary fat. See if I get the same thing going on with the LDL-C. And I do. Now, this is a good time for me to just go ahead and explain this very slowly, very carefully. What is the dietary inversion pattern? Well, I kind of explained it briefly before. I'm going to actually break it down for you. If I were to take a cholesterol test right now, and it's Sunday morning, then what I would look at is what I ate on Saturday, and the Friday before that, and the Thursday before that. I would take those 3, I would average them together. Those are the 3 days before the resulting LDL-C, and I believe it has about, my guesstimate right now is about a 30 to 50% relevance to my LDL-C score. That is a massive impact, and it shows just how agile the lipid system actually is. Now, this will take you all the way from those beginning data points all the way to August of last year. And to make it a little more prominent just how close this inversion pattern is, I'm going to flip this axis on the left side. Are you ready? You can now see visually just how tightly this holds. And don't get me wrong, there are still some confounders. But without question, there is an extremely tight relationship between these two lines, right? Okay, this, for those of you who want to get geeky, is a negative 0.80 Pearson correlation. The regression line as well is extremely close. Okay, again, all of these couplings, all of them, they are on the blue, they are the LDL-C that's resulted from, and for the 3 days before, that's the other dot. Let me put this a different way. For everything before those 3 days, they're not included in this graph at all. It's just that window of those 3 days. So, yes, I was careful to control for exercise. I was careful to control for having the same amount of supplements. But all of those things being controlled, what am I moving around my LDL-C with such huge and massive degrees? Doing it with just dietary energy, specifically dietary fat. Okay, let's look at HDL-C, the good cholesterol. It tracks with dietary fat. And interestingly, the correlation is not as strong, but that has a lot to do with the fact that it doesn't bottom out as much. You'll notice the biggest gaps are when my actual dietary fat went low, but the HDL-C did not follow fully, which I consider probably a good thing. All right. Now, I want to tell you that at first, I thought that the particle count would likewise go with the LDL-C. And slowly over time, from crunching this data, it turned out that that was not the case, that there was a gap. And it's very fascinating to watch this because there's several times in my experiments where I'll actually have LDL-C going down while LDL-P is going up, and I'll know it because it goes by this pattern. It likewise has a 3-day window it's looking at. But to use that same example I used before, if today is Sunday morning, I now just skip Saturday and I skip Friday and I focus only on Thursday, Wednesday, and Tuesday of this week, and that'll have the greatest impact on what my LDL-P will be. Let's go ahead and look at this same graph that went to August of last year, except now I'm going to adjust. And again, the dashed orange line, this is now going to refer to the 3-day average of dietary fat, but with the 2-day gap. And now I'm going to flip that axis on the left side so you can see the inverse correlation. This, by the way, is for small LDL-P. Small LDL-P. We can now actually go on to just the theory behind the inversion. So this is just a kind of Occam's razor. When it comes down to it, why is there such an emphasis on making sure that you mobilize more energy when you have less that you're eating? I think that's kind of obvious. It's one of those self-evident things, right? But before I get into that, I need to tell you what everyone on a low-carb, high-fat diet needs to know. The low-density lipoprotein has many jobs. It definitely has many jobs, but its primary job is to distribute energy from fat. I probably didn't emphasize enough, so I'm going to put it in all caps, boldface, underline. So I want to be sure that if there's any time you're going to take out your camera, it's probably right about now. Actually, to be 1,000,000% sure, I'm going to extrude it in 3D, and I'm going to fit a big arrow here. Now I'm going to physically walk over here. I'm going to point out these yellow guys, that's the cholesterol. What's more prominent? The triglycerides. And when these lipoproteins leave the station, what are they dropping off more than anything else that's inside it? Triglycerides. Especially if you're on a low-carb, high-fat diet. It is a multi-use, multi-stage biological boat. Speaking of boats, let's go ahead and actually use a basic analogy. So if the boat is the LDL-P, what are the triglycerides? The passengers. Okay, in the same analogy, what would cholesterol be? The life rafts. Is the job of a cruise ship to move around life rafts? You could say a job of a cruise ship is indeed to move around life rafts. Is the primary job of a cruise ship to move around life rafts? No, it's to move around passengers. And if you were an alien out of space, in outer space, and you were looking at cruise ships, you'd notice that they keep loading on and loading off passengers. You wouldn't have to be a genius engineer to see that. From an activity standpoint, from a payload standpoint, without question, the cruise ship's main purpose is drop off passengers. I'm telling you here today, the main purpose of a low-density lipoprotein is to drop off triglycerides. And that's what they're doing all the time, especially if you're on a low-carb, high-fat diet. Okay, now I need to tell you about the 2 types of LDL particles. And this is going to be important for you to understand what's going on with the inversion pattern. This top type is what you're going to hear about sometimes called the chylomicrons. If you eat food, that food's triglycerides are going to get packaged ultimately, I'm not going to get into all the complexities between, but ultimately in your bloodstream in chylomicrons. These guys are huge. If you ever see the little stratification thing, they're gigantic. And I call them the sprinters. They're sprinters because they load up a lot of triglycerides, they quickly run around the vascular system, drop them off, and then as they do, they become chylomicron remnants, just much smaller. As they get smaller and smaller, as they drop off more, and then eventually, boom, they meet to the liver and they're gone. They're gone. In fact, 6 to 12 hours is the safe time. Probably most of them are gone in an hour to an hour and a half. Those are the ones from food you just ate. Okay, what's the second major classification? Well, these are the ones from the gut. What about the ones that you get from the liver? These are known as VLDLs, very low density lipoproteins. And these guys are fat-based energy from storage. So if you're losing weight, guaranteed, the fat that's getting released ultimately makes its way to the liver, gets packaged in VLDLs, starts getting sent on its way. And you know what? These guys I call the distance runners. Why? Because even though their first job, just like the chylomicrons, is to distribute energy from fat, they're still going after all this time. 6 to 12 hours, 12 hours to, 4 days. Why is that important? Because when I get my cholesterol test, just like when you get your cholesterol test, you should be 12 hours fasted, right? What's left? Only one classification of these LDL particles, the ones that are from storage. So, to punctuate the point, it's pretty simple. I believe that my body is looking back, I believe your bodies are doing it too, they're looking back on about a 3-day window, and they're seeing what the abundance of energy is that's coming from your diet. And like in this scenario, oh look, there's lots and lots of incoming energy from the GI tract. I think I'll downregulate. Does that make sense, guys? Does that make sense to you? Yeah, it made sense to me too. It wasn't actually, this was only like 2 months in that this actually made a lot of sense to me. And then likewise, if there's not a lot of food coming in, you need to, of course, lose weight, you need to activate more, you need to feed your cells, therefore it's going to end up in the other classification of LDL particles. And the thing about that is, these LDL particles contain the cholesterol that, guess what, gets picked up by your cholesterol blood test. It's that simple. Okay. Now, I'm going to bring you up to speed with the identical diet experiment, as I call it, where I was fortunate enough to get my sister to jump in. That's her on the left. She's 6.5 years older. My cholesterol is at super high levels. However, hers only bumped up a little bit since she went on the diet. Her total cholesterol is just 230. Her LDL is 152. A little bit higher than what a GP would like, but still almost half of what mine is. And so what I got her to do, because she's a saint, was to do this diet with me for 13 days. 13 days, we ate identical portions. I tried to get it down to the gram. Literally, going so far as to like scramble our eggs in separate pans so that I'd be sure that the gram weight didn't commingle, right? And as we did this, I got to actually watch, because we took 7 total blood tests, what would happen in absolute terms. This is an absolute comparison of my 7 markers to her 7 markers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and overlay what the diet plan on dietary fat was, so you can actually see the inversion pattern. But even more interesting is I'm actually going to take away the dietary fat, and for the next several graphs, I'm just going to compare her responses to mine in terms of blood. So you ready to see the relative graph between mine and hers? This is overlaid on the left side, on the pink side, is her axes, and on the right side is my axis. As you can see, the correlation is striking. Our total cholesterol, its comparison was 0.94, and the regression was a staggering 0.897. I couldn't believe it myself. I thought that they would be closely related. I had no idea it would be this closely related. And that was the point at which I really realized the systems were extremely close together. Let's go ahead and look at LDL-C for an absolute comparison. Now let's go ahead and do a relative comparison. Same thing, extraordinarily high comparison, extraordinarily good regression. Let's go ahead and look at LDL-P. And to be fair, because I want to be completely transparent, that red one that I'm pointing out here, that actually was an unexpected. It should have actually gone up, but it didn't, given the pattern. So this is actually what the Pearson would be and the regression, if we include that, and we should. But I will say this, if in fact that was a lab error or something else, then taking that part away, we would actually see what the difference would be on the Pearson and the regression. And then finally, I want to go ahead and show the also-rans, which is the HDL and the triglycerides, and these are absolute comparisons. There's not even a relative comparison. Same markers, almost identical markers, completely different bloodstreams, completely different metabolisms. Okay, so let's talk about the effect of distance running on cholesterol, and this is something new that I wasn't able to present before, and this was since August. The reason I had been careful about exercise right up until August is after I'd learned how much it was about energy distribution and cellular repair, I knew that I needed to keep my total amount of exercise limited while I was doing all of these experiments so that I could tease out those, all that data. So then I decided to go ahead and ramp up and change gears. This is my wife, by the way. She's Rocket. I'm Groot, as you can see. And between August and January of this year, we did all this. And unfortunately, I did kind of a cold open to my training, which really sucked. I should have been training for 3 months before my first half marathon. I cold opened with just a month to go, and those of you guys who run know why that was dumb. But it did give me some great data. So you see the glowing line now. This is now appended onto the graph that you saw before. The glowing line to the right, that is during the period in which I was doing distance running, right? Now, we're going to go ahead and flip it. And the advantage we have now, because my inversion pattern is so well mapped, we can now see the gap and the difference that it made when I was running. So you can actually see from this graph just how much lower than anticipated my matching amount would be, right? And sure enough, the 2 times in which my LDL-C was the lowest as far as standard deviations off from where you would expect it to be was in the cold open, where, by the way, I was dying after I did my first 7-mile run after not doing any runs on a Sunday. I took that blood test 2 days later. And the very last one, where we had done a 5K, a 10K, and then a full marathon all in the same week. And I took a blood test 24 hours after that. On the LDL-P side, it likewise showed the largest gaps on those 2 times as well, which once again, and I'm not going to have enough time to really get into great detail, but the LDL-C is used for repair of cells. Cells need cholesterol. In fact, I could do a whole speech on all of the amazing things you'll find out about cholesterol and why the body's so greedy at holding it. But one of the things your cells do, and the reason why your LDL-C and your LDL-P can go down for bad reasons, is because when your cells are damaged, they do something called endocytosis. They pull out a bunch of receptors, put into a pit, and literally engulf it, which is just another way of saying they eat the LDL particle. LDL particles are made of phospholipids and free cholesterol. Guess what the membranes of your cells are made of? Phospholipids, free cholesterol. Cholesterol is one of the most structurally amazing things there is in life. Just got to fit that in real quick. Okay. But triglycerides, if you've been picking up a theme, is what I was very interested in. And while triglycerides, I've been showing you a lot of graphs of, and it's because its standard deviation is much higher, and understandably so, given how much energy is getting juggled around. I anticipated and was most curious about what triglycerides would do following these races, because I suspect hyper-responders, particularly people like me, are going to see lots of depletion of triglycerides because that's what their body's mainly running on. So here's what happens when I go ahead and flip the axes on the left side. Even though this is still a very noisy graph, there's no question during the period of time in which I'm doing the distance running, the triglycerides are brought way low. And in fact, the 3 lowest triglyceride scores I've ever had were 24 hours after I did a long race. Lowest ones I had ever had. Okay. So now I want to fit this in real quick, particularly if you are in the audience and you are a medical professional working with low carb athletes especially. This was something that's very recent. I find, and I call this profile a lean mass hyperresponder. This has been sent to me so often that whenever I see somebody's labs, even before I know who they are, I can say, are you both lean and athletic, or both? And usually I get back, yeah, I'm both. How did you know that? Without ever actually knowing who they are. They all have the same things in common. Their LDL is 200 or higher. Sometimes I see it 300, 400. Nicole Racine has hers at like 585, super high. Their HDL is 80. Often I'll see it in the hundreds. Sometimes I've seen 120, 140. Yet their triglycerides are very low, 70 or lower, and often I'll see them in 40s or even 30s, particularly if they're very proactive, they work out a lot. They're feeding their cells with triglycerides. And again, this is making more sense, or at least it should be, in the fact that you can understand why those lipids are mobilizing more and more of that energy, dropping it off. And in the absence of having a tank full of glycogen stores, because you have a lower carb diet, and lower body fat, therefore lower adipose stores, there's a lot of reason in the presence of higher energy demands to be mobilizing more fat for energy. So this is why the inversion pattern changes everything. First, many reduce their dietary fat or even attempt an extended fast before taking a cholesterol test, assuming it will lower it, and that includes myself. I thought, in that second test, reducing my fat that low would absolutely change my cholesterol test. When it shot up high, that's why I was relieved, because I realized the mechanism behind it was not what I understood it to be. But indeed, this is likely spiking it. And I almost want to say it's almost certainly spiking it now. Since I did actually a recent blog post called The Fasting Disaster. I've had so many people writing into me that they've experienced exactly the same thing. You should fast for 12 to 14 hours before your cholesterol test, but you should not consider multi-day fasting without knowing that that's probably going to spike your cholesterol. Second, I would like to have you guys try the day placebo pill outside, where I'm going to tell you now you can eat all the fat you want, and sure enough, conversely, many who feel that their medication or therapy is protective may actually have more dietary fat in the expectation it will be relieved, and thus lowering the score. Do you see what I'm saying? You could be taking a statin, You could be taking niacin, and it could actually be that you're creating your own confounder by the fact that you're more comfortable eating more dietary fat while bringing down your cholesterol score because of that. And this is probably the biggest bomb I'm going to drop. Those of us nearing the end of life care often experience reduced appetite, which may be resulting in a higher total in LDL cholesterol, creating an association with illness that wouldn't otherwise be there if that was controlled for. And this is why, and I hate to say it, you can say I have too high standards, but every cholesterol study that does not tightly control for dietary fat in the 3 days before blood draws may be ignoring the biggest confounder. And that is why I call upon people outside the low-carb community to falsify the inversion pattern. Please, prove me wrong. Prove that this is not in play, because this is a major factor for all cholesterol studies right now that do not tightly control for the participants, whether it's human or rodent. Makes no difference. You've got to know this. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and rewind all the way back to October, where I did the extreme drop experiment. And this was actually the first public presentation of my data. It was at the Keto Gains seminars on October 9th, and this is where I did a slide where I had actually taken my blood draw on October 7th, and then I told everybody in the room on October 10th I predict my cholesterol is going to drop like crazy. It's the only time I got to do that, wrap a live experiment around a presentation. Sure enough, this was the breakdown. I had just a little bit of food for 3 days, technically 5, but that's all in the thing, and also a lot of food immediately afterwards, and then got the blood draw on October 10th. And these were the results, and it was indeed a massive shift. My total cholesterol dropped by 66, my LDL-C dropped by 73, LDL-P dropped by 1,115 points. In 3 days, my small LDL-P fell off the map. And after doing so, a lot of people kept writing to me. They said, I want to know how to do this protocol. And I kept trying to explain. I still, by the way, have to keep trying to explain. It's not a diet plan. It's not a 5,000 calorie diet plan. And for that matter, you don't have to have 5,000 calories. You're just trying to create a gap between what you ate at the beginning of the blood test and what you ate at the end. And so I created 3 different flavors of how to do this. Most people have done that first one, option 1. But you see this second one, option 2? I'm going to get back to that in a sec, because now, go ahead and fast forward to this week, which is where I'm going to present to you the Ketofest cholesterol experiment. Currently in progress. And before I launch into this, I want to emphasize something important. I have posted my hypothesis in advance of this experiment. And I've been doing daily blogs of everything that I could, given I am a one-man band, up to this point in time. And I want to promise, not just everybody in this room, but everybody who's watching this and who will ever become aware of this, I intend to put up the data tomorrow, the raw data, in a preliminary, because I believe good science is about transparency. And I can't emphasize enough that the biggest heartbreak that I've had in learning about medicine and biochemistry is just how many shenanigans, how many different events that I've now found of buried data. And the truth is, at the end of the day, I need to live with whatever it is that I hypothesize, not because I need to worry about embarrassment, but because I believe that's how science must progress. Thank you. So sure enough, I managed to find a few people that could go by this schedule. We're doing the same thing. Tuesday, July 11th, all the way to Thursday, July 13th, they've been eating low calories. Some have chosen to straight up fast. I've warned them, if they fasted, their numbers could get really large. Then do a 12 to 14 hour water fast in between. And then, of course, go ahead and do the morning blood test, which took place on Friday this last week, where we actually got 24 participants to join us in doing this. And now everybody is supposed to be ramping up on the food. I don't know for sure, because I haven't been watching all of them. But I will say this. I have a lot to thank with PTS Diagnostics. They've been a little shy about which logos I put up and so forth, so I'll just name them outright. They have generously been helping out with the cost of the equipment and the service. And honestly, this whole experiment wouldn't be happening without them. Thank you. Thank you. By the way, you recognize these photos I had from before? These aren't my left hand. So I would like to ask everybody who is currently in the room and in the experiment to please stand for me, please. And please be recognized. Thank you. Have you guys been eating enough? Have you been eating enough? Okay. Yes, that's great. The worst part is, after this, be sure that you eat a lot before the after party, because unfortunately, you still have to fast for 12 hours before you get your blood draw tomorrow. Don't forget that. Let's talk about me one more time. How am I doing? This, of course, is the CIMT, and as Jeffrey Gerber pointed out, I also had a Doppler. I don't have that one in here, but this one was the results that I'd had, and I now have 3 total tests that I've done. One that I did in July of 2016, where my left carotid artery was 558. The other one was 687. I believe it's micrometers. And then on the second test, it really hardly moved. I mean, slightly less, but mainly I'm watching to see that it doesn't get a lot larger. And then this most recent one that I got in May, it's the lowest it's been yet since started measuring it. Feel good about that. I don't put a lot of stock into it, and I don't know what the margin of error is. So really, I'm not going to feel really comfortable until I see a lot more tests. But is it growing at an exponential rate? No. I'm feeling pretty good. I've also had an echo, and I've also had a stress test. I've actually had several EKGs. I have a clean bill of health from one end to the other, but I wanted to take it the next step. I know I'm a pretty expensive lab rat, and I know a lot of people are watching my health markers. I flew to New York, to North Shore University, and this is me getting a bit of contrast dye plugged in. This was on May 2nd, and I took what is arguably the most advanced, non-invasive heart scan in the world. It's 640 slice CT. And what do you get for your $550 and a trip to New York? You get extremely advanced, several different multi-directional angled shots of your heart. Actually pretty cool for us geeks, I'll just say that. So this is me from the front. How about me from the side? All those little stars and dots, you're actually seeing blood flow going through my vascular system, right? But here's the best one. Have you guys heard about this calcium score? Heard about that? Well, I'm really going to show you something straight from the heart. You can be the cardiologist this time. This last scan, you want to watch for the white specks or lines that are showing up in the middle. But yeah, keep it going. I want to be sure. Have you guys seen it yet? No, I still have a calcium score of 0. Now, I want to be a good scientist, and a good scientist will tell you, look, calcification takes a while to develop, and at a minimum, I feel like this is a good baseline. I plan to take another one of these in probably 6 to 7 years, because CT scans are like about 200 chest x-rays. You don't want to get that many millisieverts. And I want to be sure that I'm careful as much as I can be, but at the same time, again, be transparent. Believe me, if I develop signs that convince me that I am, in fact, developing atherosclerosis, I will announce it on my blog, and I will be transparent about it, because my journey is one of science, not of advocacy. But I can say this. While I can't tell you that I know for sure that higher levels of LDL-C or LDL-P generate atherosclerosis, because a good scientist can't tell you what they can't actually confirm, I likewise can't tell you for sure if there isn't a leprechaun in my bathtub at home. If you're the asserter trying to assert to me there's a leprechaun in my bathtub at home, it's on you to prove it to me, not me to disprove it to you. So, until the lipid hypothesis is no longer a hypothesis, or until I can see the changes myself, signs of inflammation, signs of oxidative stress, or any other thing that I think is more likely to be associated with atherosclerosis, I have no reason to take steps to lower my cholesterol. Thank you.